Okay, let's round out our global tour of the biggest, most important trade blocs on the planet by heading to the old world, to Europe, to tackle the Mac Daddy of all trade blocs, the most successful economic/political organization of states in modern times, if not for all times, challenging the very nature of the nation-state concept itself. Yes, the European Union, the EU. It is the most ginormous, most awesome, most compelling, most intriguing entity on the planet right now, particularly from a trade bloc standpoint. Whew! So if it's so awesome, why didn't I start with this one first? I started with NAFTA and went through the rest of the planet. Because it is so big and so complex and so complicated and has evolved into so much more that I had to kind of wait till the end to get to it now. And I'm going to try to do this as briefly as possible because I'm going to talk about the European Union in great detail once we get to our Europe region. First and foremost, it is a trade bloc. It's kind of hard to see that in today's world because the EU is so much more. But it is first and foremost a trade bloc. That's how it started, and that continues to be its undisputed strength. It's doing a lot of other things, and some people disagree with a lot of the things that the EU is doing, and I'm talking about people within the EU. But of all the things it does, nobody is arguing that the trade stuff is bad. Everybody thinks the trade is awesome. It's made them rich. It's great. And with 27 states now in its membership, I mean, it's an economic juggernaut in the world. Its GDP is somewhere in the neighborhood of $16 to $17 trillion a year. That's if you took all the member states' economies and put them all together under an EU umbrella. That would be the biggest single economy on planet Earth, bigger than the United States GDP. Again, that's if you take the EU as a singular whole, which increasingly the world does. And that's why I wanted to talk about it some here. It's just so much more than a trade bloc now, though. It boggles the mind. It is fast becoming what I call the United States of Europe. But I'm getting ahead of myself as usual. Why did this 27-state juggernaut, this huge entity which is impacting all parts of the globe now, why did it start in Europe? Why here? How did it happen? Why did it happen in this particular place? In a word, war! Because the Europeans, for a very long time, have actually not been working together economically or politically, have not been challenging the idea of the nation state. They've been perpetuating conflict between each other, between their very individual nation states. You might have heard of a few of these conflicts. The World War I or World War II or 1,000 other wars in European history if you were forced to suffer through a class in that in high school. So this is an area of the planet which for most of its history has collided with itself, has destroyed itself time and time and time again. And when you have low tech and smaller wars between just one or two countries back in the olden days of several hundred years ago, there's death and destruction, but it really took the death and destruction of the 20th century to put a cap on all this madness. World War I was bad enough, which leveled Europe, but when World War II occurred, everybody realized they were not going to live through a World War III. So it really was the spark that started the EU, was perpetual conflict, which led to ultimate destruction in the 20th century, which got European thinkers thinking and saying, how can we not do this again? We've signed treaties with each other in the past. We've signed all kinds of peace stuff in the past and promised not to attack each other, and it ain't never worked. How can we now in the 20th century really bind ourselves together so that we can't go to war with each other again? And some really smart people came up with the answer. Economically bind yourselves together. Form a union, as it were, an economic union. And once you're tied together economically, it will cost both parties money to attack each other, so you won't do it. Long story short, it's worked out pretty well for them. Now let me give you the longer story now that I give you the short version. In 1951, 1952, this is after World War II ended. World War II ended in 1945, and Europe was leveled, destroyed, and the entire continent had to be rebuilt. Well, what do you need to rebuild a continent? You got to have your buildings and industries and bridges and roads, and you need steel and coal. Coal was a major energy source at the time. So you need energy and you need steel to rebuild all this stuff. So in 1951, 1952, some very forward-thinking countries basically got an economic union, a pact together, called the ECSC, standing for the European Coal and Steel Community. Now, again, it was based kind of on trade. It wasn't free trade yet. It was more of an economic union to control these crucial resources. And these countries got together and said, hey, look, let's not compete with each other for these resources. We all need them. We all need this stuff to rebuild. And we don't want to immediately get back into a competitive thing again. We just did that in World War II. So let's work together to control and regulate these crucial resources. I'm not so much concerned that you know all the timeline and all the acronyms here, but I do want you to know who the original six were, who signed this ECSC back in 51. It's what I call the real European core, then and still now. And the original six were France, Germany, Italy, Belgium, Netherlands, and Luxembourg. They're the real continental core of power. They were, they still are, and they're the ones that kind of started this. Let's work together to rebuild. Now, this union evolved over time. They had an European Atomic Energy Agency they created because coal wasn't enough, so they needed atomic energy. So they created that under this kind of the same umbrella. And they kind of in 1957 said, hey, let's kind of merge these things together, our coal and steel thing and our atomic thing. And you know what? Let's now start talking about opening up borders for trade. We've got our economies back going now in the 50s. Let's start opening trade with each other, lowering tariffs, lowering trade barriers so we can all make more money and our economies will go forward. And that's when they made the EC. Sometimes you see it the EEC, the European Economic Community, or just the EC, the European Community, whichever, I don't care. But that was 1957, 1958. And this thing has just continued to grow ever since then. That's the basic mechanics of how it worked, and it just kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger for the last decades and decades and decades. By 1993 is when they adopted the formal European Union title that you now know in today's world. And at the same time, they had the intent to create the common currency, which of course they've now done, common economic policy, a political union where they built like a parliament for the entire continent, a legislative body, common military procedures and maneuvers started to be worked out. Why do all these countries all have an individual military? We don't want them fighting anymore, remember? So let's pool our militaries together as well. Wow, I mean, that's a major big deal. Very quickly you see that it's gotten beyond a simple economic union. Started as kind of a not real free trade union, but an economic union that merged into a free trade pact, which merged into a whole lot more. And there's been major expansions along the way as more and more countries in Europe said, hey, can we get in on that? Can we sign up? Can we sign up? Now, why would that be? Why would it continue to grow? Why would other countries want into this union of the original six? More money, man! The basic drive for any economic union that we've talked about is that it does prove itself very quickly. When you lower tariffs, you increase trade between countries, everybody gets richer. And the original core six got richer the fastest, and other countries in Europe said, we want in on the action too. Come on, let us free trade with the entire bloc. And that's why it continued to grow and grow and grow into the $16.5 trillion GDP in today's world. But you might also ask yourself, well, I mean, I can see why Luxembourg wants in. They're small, they're poor. I can see why Portugal wants in, they're poor. Why would the rich countries want to stay in? I mean, think about this. Germany is the number 4 economy on planet Earth now. It was number 3 back then. France is a top 10 economy. The UK is a top 10 economy. Why would the rich countries want in? Because dudes, in today's world, they all want to get richer too, and the free trade bloc is the best vehicle to do that. And were they to go it alone, even Germany being the number 4 economy on planet Earth, could it compete with the United States one-on-one? Forget about it. Smack them people down. It's not going to happen. Could they compete with rising China right now? Hell no. The Chinese will smack them down too. Much less Belgium. I mean, Belgium's not going to compete with the U.S. or China. But as a single collective economic union, yeah, They can, and they do, and the EU is the single biggest economy on planet Earth, and it does compete with the other big boys like the US, China, Japan. The EU is raising the roof and raising the bar, and they're raising a lot of interesting questions too. Yes, it is a kick-ass trade bloc. It has a free movement of goods and services. There's virtually no tariffs at all that I know of between any goods between any of the member states anymore. And on top of this, jot this down, free movement of labor, free movement of people. Yeah! Wham! That's the big unique thing that they started. And not many other trade blocs have done it yet, but some of them are thinking about it. Once you're a EU member, the people in your country can freely walk into all the other 27 member states. Go for it. You don't even need a passport. They phased out passports. Some of you have to be as old as me to even remember going to Europe and getting your passport checked all the time when you went from France to Switzerland into Italy. Now, the train don't even stop. It just keep on going. So it is a very big deal that they have taken this additional step. This really is kind of a new take on supranationalist organizations altogether, and with no reservations. Just the trade bloc part and the free movement of goods and the free movement of people has helped all the member states just get richer and richer and richer. Could they have done it without the EU? Maybe, but no one's disputing they've all done fabulous under the EU umbrella, which is why all these other states, a lot more of them, at least 4 more to my knowledge, are trying to get in, on the fast track to get in, and there's 4 other countries that are trying to get on the short list to get in too. So this is not finished growing, not yet. But here's the other intriguing questions. This isn't just about trade anymore. That's not just what they do, and you know that. Yes, the free movement of peoples makes it very unique, but there is now integration at virtually all levels of European society under this EU umbrella. It's not just trade anymore. What am I talking about specifically? You do not have to know all of these by name, but I want you to think about these things. They have an overarching singular constitution for the entire EU membership. They have a kind of a singular government. They have a singular parliament or legislative body which passes laws. I mean, this is starting to look like a United States of Europe. They have a singular court system, singular laws, singular human rights. They have like a Bill of Rights of Europe. I mean, and this applies across all of them. If you're a convict running away from a conviction in Spain, you can't just run away and hide in another European country now. Singular law. They're going to catch you over here in Germany and send your ass back to Spain. There is a singular environmental policy, singular agricultural policy, singular energy policy for all of Europe now under the EU umbrella. They have a singular infrastructure, kind of like the U.S. has interstate roads between their states. There's a singular infrastructure in Europe as well. There's a singular monetary unit that I know you've heard about, the euro. They are increasingly working on a singular defense policy. Again, why would 27 countries in Europe all have their own military? What a waste of resources. Have a single EU military, and they're working towards that. Increasingly, they're working under a single foreign policy. Now, that one's still got a little ways to go, but there is an EU foreign policy. They will make statements and say, here's what Europe thinks about Iran. Here's what Europe thinks about China. Dudes, that's crazy. That's new. That's not just a trade bloc anymore. The EU is now an actual individual legal entity on its own. The EU has a seat at the United Nations. It has a seat at the G20. It has a seat at the WTO. The EU, the government body, the EU, has the ability to negotiate international treaties, foreign policy, all that stuff. I mean, that's tremendous. That's why this supranationalist organization is so important to at least understand tangentially a little bit. So, for its stabilizing and peaceful influence on Europe, I mean, there ain't been a war since. For the sizable economic / trade growth it has facilitated, for its political evolution that is changing and challenging the definitions of modern statehood itself, for all these things and a whole bunch more, the EU has really become the model that to a greater or lesser extent, the world is increasingly following. And I don't mean every single bloc on planet Earth, but the EU has really made that much impact. Every entity does think about Well, what are they doing? What's the EU up to? Should we adopt the policies like that? Should we have free movement of people like that? We think about a lot of the ones we've already talked about, like the ASEAN or Mercosur. Ones we're going to talk about, like the African Union or the SCO. All of these entities think about, okay, should we do that like the EU? I mean, that's kind of very forward thinking. Should we do what they're seems like it's working there. Maybe we should try that. Really, it's only NAFTA that still kind of stands alone as a hell no. That's just a free trade bloc and we ain't doing none of that other shit. So the EU has had very great influence across all of the planet, does still now, has great economic influence across the planet, and is the EU, is it the future of the world or is it a fiasco? It really depends on who you ask in Europe and the world. Whichever opinion you hold, the European Union is a major shaper of international politics and international economies the world over. So you better get used to it. European Union!